Picture this. You're standing at the altar, hands trembling, not from love or excitement, but from terror. The person beside you is a complete stranger. You've never spoken. You may never love them. And in a few moments, you'll be bound to them until death do you part. But death, in medieval times, was often closer than you think. Welcome to marriage in the Middle Ages, where love was a luxury few could afford, and survival was never guaranteed. The year is 1347. Margaret, barely 14, clutches a wilted flower as she walks toward her fate. Her father has arranged her marriage to Lord Edmund, a man 3 times her age with yellowed teeth and breath that reeks of rot. She's never seen him smile. She's heard whispers that his first wife died under mysterious circumstances. His second wife lasted only 2 winters before succumbing to what the village called a wasting sickness. Now Margaret will be the third. This wasn't unusual. This was Tuesday in medieval Europe. Marriage in the Middle Ages wasn't about finding your soulmate or building a life together. It was a business transaction, a political alliance, a survival strategy. Love, if it existed at all, was expected to grow after the wedding, if you lived long enough to cultivate it. For most people, marriage was their only shot at escaping the grinding poverty that defined peasant life. But it came with a price that modern minds can barely comprehend. Women especially entered marriages knowing they were trading whatever small freedoms they possessed for a lifetime of servitude, childbearing, and quite possibly an early grave. Let's step into the world of a typical medieval bride. You wake before dawn in a one-room hovel that houses your entire family. Parents, siblings, grandparents, and whatever livestock needs shelter from the wolves. The walls are made of mud and straw, constantly damp, always cold. Smoke from the central fire pit burns your eyes because there's no proper chimney. Your bed is straw on the ground, shared with at least 3 other people. You're 12 years old, and today is your wedding day. You've known this day was coming since you could walk. Your parents negotiated your future when you were still learning to speak. They received a few silver coins, maybe a pig, in exchange for your hand. You've been told you're lucky. Some girls are promised to men before they're even born. Your wedding dress is your only dress, just cleaned for the occasion. It's made of rough wool that scratches your skin raw. There are no white gowns, no veils of silk. White fabric is for the wealthy, and you are not wealthy. You will never be wealthy. The ceremony takes place at the church door, not inside. The priest speaks Latin you don't understand, while your future husband places a ring on your finger, not a symbol of love, but a mark of ownership. You are now his property, as surely as his horse or his land. But the ring is cold comfort for what comes next. Your new husband leads you to his home, which may be no better than the one you left. If you're fortunate, he's a craftsman or merchant with a proper house. If fortune has abandoned you, he's a serf like your father, and you've simply moved from one hovel to another. The wedding night arrives with the setting sun, and with it, a brutal reality that no one prepared you for. Medieval marriages were expected to be consummated immediately. There was no honeymoon period, no time to get acquainted. Consummation was a legal requirement, often witnessed by family members to ensure the marriage was valid. You're a child. He's a grown man. Do the math. Rape within marriage wasn't just legal. It was expected. A woman's body belonged to her husband as completely as his plow or his ox. Saying no wasn't an option that existed in your vocabulary or your world. And this was just the beginning. Within months, you're pregnant. In medieval times, this was both inevitable and terrifying. Childbirth was the leading cause of death for women, claiming 1 in 3 mothers. There were no hospitals, no doctors, no pain relief. When your time came, you'd be attended by local women who knew little more than folklore and superstition. You labor for days in agony. The midwives burn herbs and mutter prayers, but they have no understanding of infection, blood loss, or breached births. If complications arise, you simply die. Your husband will mourn you for a respectable period, perhaps a month, before seeking a new wife. If you survive childbirth, you'll do it again within a year or 2, and again, and again. Medieval women who lived to adulthood averaged 6 to 8 pregnancies. Many didn't survive them all. Those who did often found themselves caring for children who wouldn't live to see their 5th birthday. Infant mortality rates hovered around 50%. You'd watch half your babies die from diseases that are now prevented by simple vaccines. You'd bury them in unmarked graves and immediately try to conceive again, because children were economic necessities, farmhands, caretakers, insurance policies for your old age. But pregnancy and childbirth were only part of the nightmare. Daily life as a medieval wife was a relentless cycle of backbreaking labor. You rose before dawn to milk cows, feed chickens, tend fires, prepare meals, weave cloth, mend clothes, care for children, and work the fields alongside your husband. There were no labor laws, no weekends, no concept of personal time. You worked until you collapsed, slept for a few hours, then rose to do it all again. Your hands cracked and bled from constant work, your back bent from carrying heavy loads, your knees wore down from scrubbing floors and kneeling in gardens, and through it all, you were expected to be grateful. Grateful for a husband who provided for you, grateful for a roof over your head, grateful to be alive in a world where death lurked around every corner. Speaking of death, it was everywhere in medieval marriage. Plague swept through communities like wildfire, killing entire families in weeks. The Black Death alone killed 1/3 of Europe's population in just 4 years. Imagine watching your children develop fever and swollen lymph nodes, knowing there's nothing you can do but wait for them to die. Famine was equally merciless. Crops failed regularly due to weather, disease, or war. When food ran out, families starved together. Mothers watched their children waste away, their bellies swollen from hunger, their eyes growing dim. Some families made impossible choices: which child to feed, which to let die. War brought its own horrors. Armies swept through the countryside, burning crops, stealing livestock, and killing anyone who resisted. If you were lucky, soldiers would simply take your food and leave. If you were unlucky, they'd burn your house, rape you, and kill your family before moving on to the next village. Through all of this, divorce wasn't an option. The Catholic Church considered marriage a sacrament that could never be broken. You were bound to your husband whether he beat you, neglected you, or brought home diseases from other women. Some marriages were annulled, but only in cases of close blood relation or impotence, and proving either was nearly impossible for common people. Let's talk about what happened when things went wrong in medieval marriages, because they often did. Domestic violence was not only tolerated but legally protected. A husband had the right to discipline his wife physically, as long as he didn't kill her. The law actually specified the size of stick he could use to beat her, no thicker than his thumb. This gave us the phrase, rule of thumb. Wife beating was so common that it was barely remarked upon. Neighbors wouldn't intervene. The church wouldn't condemn it. Authorities wouldn't investigate it. A woman who fled an abusive husband could be legally forced to return to him. If she refused, she could be imprisoned or even executed for abandoning her marital duties. But physical abuse was only one kind of torment. Medieval husbands could lock their wives away, deny them food, force them into sexual acts they didn't want, or simply ignore them completely. Some women lived in effective solitary confinement for years, seeing no one but their husbands and children. Mental illness, which we now understand as often treatable, was seen as demonic possession or divine punishment. Women suffering from what we'd recognize as postpartum depression or anxiety were sometimes accused of witchcraft. The treatment was exorcism, imprisonment, or death. Here's where the story takes its darkest turn. In 1484, 2 German inquisitors published a book called Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches. This manual for identifying and prosecuting witches explicitly targeted women, especially those who didn't conform to ideal feminine behavior. Suddenly, being an unhappy wife could get you killed. Women who argued with their husbands, showed signs of independence, or simply aged in ways that made them less desirable became targets for witch accusations. Widows were particularly vulnerable, especially if they inherited property that others coveted. The witch trials that followed were a holocaust specifically targeting women. Estimates suggest that between 40,000 and 60,000 people were executed for witchcraft, and roughly 80% of them were women. Many were wives whose only crime was surviving in a world designed to kill them. The accusations were often absurd. A woman might be condemned for having a birthmark, owning a cat, knowing herbal remedies, or simply living alone. The trials were shams. Torture was used to extract confessions, and the accused were often killed regardless of what they said. But here's the truly horrifying part. Husbands sometimes accused their own wives of witchcraft to get rid of them. It was easier than divorce and left the husband free to remarry. Some historians believe that witch trials were partly a socially acceptable form of domestic homicide. Even if you avoided plague, famine, war, childbirth complications, domestic violence, and witch trials, Simply growing old as a medieval wife was its own form of torture. There was no concept of retirement, no social safety net, no medical care for the elderly. When your usefulness ended, when you could no longer bear children, work the fields, or manage household tasks, you became a burden. Some families cared for elderly relatives out of genuine love or religious duty. Others saw them as mouths to feed during times when food was scarce. Elderly women were particularly vulnerable. If they outlived their husbands, they might lose their homes to male relatives. If they had no children to care for them, they could end up begging in the streets. Many elderly women accused of witchcraft were simply inconvenient relatives that someone wanted to eliminate. The lucky ones died quickly. The unlucky ones faced years of increasing frailty, pain, and isolation, watching their world shrink until it contained nothing but suffering. So why did people marry at all in medieval times? Because the alternative was usually worse. An unmarried woman had almost no legal rights and no economic opportunities. She couldn't own property, conduct business, or live independently. She was expected to remain under her father's authority until she died, essentially a permanent child. If her father died, she might become dependent on male relatives who saw her as a burden. Marriage offered the possibility of children who might care for you in old age. It provided some protection from sexual violence, not because husbands were necessarily kinder than strangers, but because rape of a married woman was considered a crime against her husband's property. Most importantly, marriage offered hope. Hope that your husband might be kind. Hope that your children might survive. Hope that you might find some small moments of happiness between the grinding hardships of daily life. Some women did find happiness in medieval marriages. Some husbands were genuinely loving partners. Some children survived to adulthood. Some families created warm, supportive homes despite the harsh realities of their world. But these were exceptions that proved the rule. For most medieval wives, marriage was a slow-motion death sentence punctuated by brief moments of joy. The numbers tell the story more starkly than any individual tale. In medieval England, life expectancy for women was around 30 years. For those who survived to age 20, it increased to about 40, still shockingly low by modern standards. The primary killers were childbirth complications, infectious diseases, and malnutrition. Marriage didn't protect women from these threats. It intensified them. Married women faced more frequent pregnancies, greater exposure to disease through sexual contact, and increased nutritional stress from feeding families before themselves. In some regions, being a wife was statistically more dangerous than being a soldier. At least soldiers had weapons and could sometimes run from battle. Wives had nowhere to run. As we stand here in our modern world, surrounded by divorce lawyers and marriage counselors, dating apps and prenuptial agreements, it's hard to imagine the reality that Margaret faced as she walked toward that altar in 1347. We complain about our relationships, debate compatibility, and agonize over whether someone is the one. Medieval wives didn't have the luxury of choice. They made the best of marriages that were often little more than legalized imprisonment. They found love where they could, raised children they knew might die, and endured hardships that would break most modern minds. Many of them were extraordinarily brave. They faced down plague and famine, abusive husbands and dangerous childbirth, accusation and execution, all while maintaining the basic functions of civilization. They fed families, taught children, preserved knowledge, and created whatever beauty they could in lives defined by struggle. Their stories deserve to be remembered, not romanticized but understood. The medieval period wasn't a time of chivalrous knights and fairy tale romances. It was a brutal era when simply being born female meant accepting a lifetime of risks that we can barely comprehend. The next time you hear someone talk about the good old days, remember Margaret. Remember the millions of women like her who lived and died in marriages that were survival exercises rather than love stories. Their pain echoes through the centuries, a reminder that the freedoms we take for granted were built on the bones of those who had no choice but to endure. In the end, perhaps that's the most haunting truth of all, that love, real love, somehow survived in a world designed to destroy it, blooming like wildflowers in a wasteland that should have killed everything beautiful. And in the darkest corners of history, that small miracle still burns like a candle flame that refuses to be extinguished.